I am so excited to be here tonight, and thank you all so much for making time on this beautiful August day to be with us here tonight. Okay. I'm very excited and honored to introduce the lovely and wonderful Cord Jefferson. Cord is an Emmy Award-winning writer who has worked on some of the most complex and popular series of the past decade. With a motley list of projects under his belt, Cord has earned praise for being a multifaceted and versatile storyteller. Up next, Cord will make his directorial debut with American Fiction, starring Jeffrey Wright. Yes, a little round of applause, because that's why we're here tonight. Cord also wrote the screenplay, which he adapted from the novel Erasure by Percival Everett. Ryan Johnson and Ram Bergman's T Street and MRC are producing, with MGM's Orion Pictures releasing worldwide fall 2023. Cord's most recent credits are a powerhouse of critically acclaimed television series that include the groundbreaking limited series Watchmen, for which he won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Writing for a limited series along Damon Lindelof for their episode This Extraordinary Being. Other credits include the philosophical comedy The Good Place and drama series Succession. Among the accolades that Cord has earned for his work on these series are 2 Writers Guild Awards and an NAACP Image Award for writing The Good Place's Tinker Tailor Demon Spy episode. Cord's other credits include the HBO Max series Station 11, one of my faves, Netflix Master of None, where he wrote the episode New York, I Love You, Comedy Central's The Nightly Show with Larry Wilmore, and the Starz comedy series Survivor's Remorse. Prior to making his way into television, Cord was a journalist, most notably serving as the West Coast editor for Gawker. During his tenure in journalism, Cord also wrote for outlets including the New York Times, National Geographic, NPR, USA Today, MSNBC, Bookforum, and The Daily Beast, among others. Will you please join me giving a round of applause to welcome Cord to the stage?
Thank you, Jenna.
Hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm very nervous.
Don't be. Oh my gosh, don't be. I know, how's it feel being on this side of the microphone now?
Very terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's you guys are the first people that we are showing this film to in any capacity. So this is very, very frightening for me.
Don't be scared. It's gonna be a breeze.
Thank you.
But let's start easy. Let's talk about, how you came to the project, what drew you to Percival Everett's work in the first place.
A friend told me to read Percival Everett, and I ignored her for a long time. And then I was reading a book review for a different book, and in the review, in December 2020, and in the review it said that there was satire in the book reminiscent of Percival Everett's Erasure. And I had never read Erasure, and so I decided to finally buy it and read it over Christmas break. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've ever had the feeling of and it's a great feeling of reading a book and feeling as if it's written specifically for you, like somebody's written you a gift. That's how I felt when I was reading Erasure. It felt like somebody sat down to write Cord Jefferson a book. And within 30 pages, I knew that I wanted to adapt it and write the screenplay. And by the time that I was finished with the book, I knew that I wanted to direct it when I adapted it. And halfway through it, I started reading it with Jeffrey Wright in mind. So I actually sort of started reading it in Jeffrey Wright's voice, because he was the dream guy that I would cast if I could ever make it. And he agreed.
Oh, I love that. What were the themes in the book that appealed to you immediately?
Well, like you said, I started out as a journalist after college. I was a journalist for about 8 or 9 years, and when I started sort of shifting away from journalism, I remember one of the last things that somebody reached out to me and asked me to write. It was when Obama was still in office, and there was a police chief somewhere in Maine who had been caught in like a diner, a local diner, calling Barack Obama a nigger. And I remember somebody reached out to me from a website and asked me if I wanted to write about that. And I remember thinking like, you know, and it was this sort of like series of things that people always ask me to do. Anytime that sort of like a young black teenager was shot by a police officer and killed unnecessarily, and anytime that, you know, there was a racist incident, I had sort of like become the go-to person to write about this stuff. And I remember thinking like, why do these people only come to me to write about tragedy? Why do these people only come to me to write about awful things that happen? And why is it our responsibility to explain, like, what do you need to say about a police chief calling the president of the United States a racial slur? Like, what more can I add to that besides like, this is terrible, and the fact that people have been doing this for 8 years is terrible. But I feel like there's not really sort of like anything else you can say beyond that, and the fact that, you know, I sort of like equated it with, you know, writing another article about like why police killing a black teenager is awful is, I equated it with like, you know, nobody would ever reach out to a white journalist and say, hey, you know, this drunk driver just hit and killed this kid on a bicycle. Would you write an essay about why that's wrong? And it's like, well, it's obviously wrong, you know, to suggest that like you need a journalist to come out and explain why it's wrong is a disservice to the dead kid, because it's just sort of like an obvious error. And the fact that you need somebody to try to sort of explain to people why this is bad is just, it feels bad. It feels bad that is my job. And so I just started getting sick of it. And then when I got into film and television, I was like, oh, this is great. Now it's fantasy and I can write whatever I want. It's all fiction. And then, you know, I realized that people were like, oh, great. Can you write this slave narrative? You want to write a movie about a slave? And it's like, well, no, I don't want to write a movie. And it's like, well, do you want to write a movie about a crack dealer? And it's like, no, I don't want to write a movie about a crack dealer. Like, well, and it was the same thing over, like, why is it always white people asking me to write about black people going through terrible things? Like, why is that even after I left journalism, why was that the expectation when I was in film and television? And so that's what that book was about. And the book is, you know, the book's Erasure, I don't know if anybody's read it, but Erasure is about a black novelist named Thelonious Ellison who goes by Monk. And he specializes in contemporary retellings of like classical Greek literature and classical Greek mythology. And everybody's like, you know, your books are interesting and the characters are well developed, but like, you know, we don't see what this, like, what do ancient Greeks have to do with like the African American experience today? And he's like, well, you know, that I think that my story is universal and people can understand them. And they're like, well, you know, that's fine. Good luck with that. And he's not really selling a lot of books, and he's taking around his latest manuscript and nobody's buying it. And so in a sort of moment of frustration and anger, he goes home and writes his own version of this kind of book that people want, about sort of a young black man that's out to destroy himself, and he's carrying a gun and he's shooting at cops and he's impregnating all these women. And he writes it intending to sort of, for it to be a satire and this piece of performance art that he sends out to all the publishers, and they feel ashamed when they read it because they realize like this is what they're expecting from black artists. But it turns out to become a massive success, and in like it's the most, he sells it for the most money he's ever sold a book for. It becomes sort of like a #1 bestseller on the New York Times list, and it becomes the biggest hit of his career. And sort of, so the rest of the story is him existing between these two worlds, where he writes the book under a pseudonym, and so nobody knows that Monk himself actually wrote it, and he's requiring the money that the book is providing because his mother has Alzheimer's, and so he all of a sudden needs a bunch of money so he can pay for her round-the-clock care. So on the one hand, he needs the money that the book is providing. On the other hand, he's growing to resent the success of the book in sort of like the mainstream and what it says about American culture and what it says about people. And the fact that he was never able to have this success in his career when he was, you know, writing the things that were important to him. So I just saw myself in that so much, because I just got to a point when it's like, I mean, it's like, look, I'm happy for people who make slave movies. I think that especially we're seeing this world when people are trying to erase history and they're trying to get rid of sort of like slavery in schools. I understand why it's important to have these kinds of films, but I always find it a disappointment when the films and TV shows that people take seriously are always tragedy. It's always slaves. It's always a Green Book. It's always 12 Years a Slave. It's always something where black people are being punished and physically brutalized, and not, not sort of any of the other stories that white people get to tell. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I feel like, Jewish people get Schindler's List and Annie Hall, right? Like, it's sort of like that's sort of the continuum of these stories. It's like, yeah, you have the tragedy of the Holocaust, but you also have just a guy dating in New York City, and people love that. And it's like, I just feel like we don't get the same leeway and breadth when it comes to our lives and the storytelling about our lives. Yeah.
So what was it like when you reached out to Percival? What were those interactions like?
It was very scary because I know that Percival had said no to people in the past. I love Percival, but he is, not but, I love Percival, and he's a little, Percival's very content just going home and writing. Like, if everybody just left Percival alone to write novels, that's all he would do. I think that Percival, trying to get Percival to leave, like, the square block of his house in Pasadena is difficult, but, because he just likes to stay home and write. So I was terrified that, for whatever reason, we wouldn't get along, and he would tell me no because I had my heart set on making this. But he and I hit it off really quickly, and he's become a really good friend. He saw the film a few months ago and said he really liked it. The most terrifying thing was that before he agreed to let me make it, he gave me the rights to the book so I could adapt it. But then before he actually signed the official paper, he made me send him the script, which was the most terrifying few days of the entire process, was just sitting there waiting for him to sort of like bless the script after reading it. But he came and he said the thing that he really liked about it was that I sort of took the book and made it into something that was my own. That sort of like he considers it like a separate piece of art. That was I think the kindest thing that he said to me about it.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And you said that Jeffrey Wright was your dream lead.
Yeah.
And so how'd that go?
It's the same. Jeffrey's. I remember seeing Jeffrey in Basquiat, which I think was the first time that I saw him act in anything, and I loved him. And then I saw him. He played the same role that he played in the stage play in Angels in America, in this HBO Angels in America miniseries that they did, and he was incredible in that. And like, I just think that he is. I've always kept my eye on him because I'm such a fan of his work, and I was always so disappointed to see him. He's like in James Bond for like 6 minutes, and it's like, and he's Commissioner Gordon in Batman, and it's like, this man is one of our greatest living actors. He should be front and center in more stuff. He shouldn't always be off to the side, on screen for 6 minutes to sort of like tell the white lead what they need to do, and then he disappears or is killed. And I think that, I will say that I know that Jeffrey wishes that he could be here tonight. He was supposed to be here, but because of the SAG strike, he cannot come to stand in solidarity with the other actors. But yeah, he's tremendous. And as soon as they're allowed to come back, I know he would love to be here.
That's great. I feel like that's a good segue for the first clip from the film that we're going to see. Can you set it up for us?
Yeah. So this is Monk coming in. So Monk has been shopping around his adaptation of this Greek play, The Persians, and it's not selling. And so this is after he's written his gimmick book, his piece of performance art, and he's going to meet his agent, who is telling him that his book has sold, and it's his agent convincing him that he should do this, and then it's a meeting with the publisher who wants to buy the book. And he's written the book under the pseudonym Stagger Lee.
So good. It's so funny.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. I texted you this after I went to the first screening, and I just felt like it was so wicked. Like I mean, I've known you for a while, and I know you're funny, but I didn't know that you had that diabolical sense of humor inside of you. And I was thinking about films like Falling Down with Michael Douglas. I was thinking about Bamboozled, obviously by Spike Lee.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, what were some of the references you were drawing from and pulling from?
I love Falling Down. I hadn't watched Falling Down in a long time, actually, but I loved that movie when I was a kid. I love Bamboozled. I would say the origin story probably of this idea was a movie called The Hollywood Shuffle. And I don't know if people remember Hollywood Shuffle.
Yeah.
But it's a tremendous Robert Townsend and Keenen Ivory Wayans movie that I saw when I was a kid. I think it came out in like 88, 89. So I was young when I saw it, but it was something that I'd never seen anything before like it. And I sort of like didn't know that you could, I think that the thing that I appreciate about it is that, I understand that these issues are serious, and issues of identity and issues of racism, and all of these things are important issues, and they have real life consequences and sometimes fatal consequences for people. But I think that the thing I think that's beautiful about the Black community, right, and the thing that I think it's something we share with the queer community and Jewish people and all kinds of oppressed people, is that we're resilient. And that even in the worst of circumstances, we found ways to make music and to enjoy each other's company and laugh and make jokes and celebrate. And I think that it does a disservice to our history to be so self-serious about all these issues and not to find ways to laugh, right? Like, I think that is so important. And so when I saw Hollywood Shuffle and I realized that these guys were talking about racism, but they were talking about it in a way that was funny, and they were sort of enjoying themselves and making something that people could go to and laugh and enjoy and like leave the theater laughing with their friends about it. That to me was kind of a revelation. And I think that I've grown up loving satire since then. And so besides that, I watched Bamboozled. I rewatched Hollywood Shuffle. I watched Sorry to Bother You, more contemporary. I watched a movie called Putney Swope. Robert Downey Sr. directed Putney Swope. And I think that I love all those movies. I think that the one thing that I wanted to avoid doing was, I think that all those movies eventually become farcical, and sort of like the satire becomes farce. And I think that's fine if that's what you want to do that, but the thing that I wanted to do was really, make this a satirical film, but also ground it in reality, because I think that, sometimes farce lets people off the hook. It lets people think that, like, oh, this is just silly. Like, this is the things that you're talking about and upset about aren't real problems because you've sort of like clearly made them into a hysterical joke. But I think that, so this is, I look to all those movies for inspiration, but I think that sort of what I wanted to do with this film was make it feel a little bit more grounded and close to the surface. Because, I feel like the things that happen in this film certainly are exaggerated to a certain extent, but not that much. You know what I mean? Like, people, even a white publisher like that who seems pretty oblivious. Like, I've had, I went to a general meeting when I first started working in TV where a white executive asked me if I was a mulatto. I have a friend who, her first TV show that she worked on, she was the only black woman in the room. And her first day on the job, the showrunner turned to her and said, "What do you think about that, Blackie?" Right to her face. And nobody in the room said anything. It was just something that sort of like was tolerated. And so, any time that sort of I show this film and people, anytime that you think something is exaggerated and somebody's cruelty or obliviousness is exaggerated, just I remember asking a friend of mine, a woman, what's the crassest thing a man had ever said to her, a strange man had ever said to her. And my mind was blown by the things that she told me. And so I just think that the stuff that we think is sort of satirical and exaggerated and ridiculous, like, if you actually talk to people in those situations, you'll find out that a lot of this stuff isn't isn't sort of like too far off the mark from what's actually happening in these rooms. So I just wanted to make this feel a little bit more rooted in reality, because in my mind it is rooted in reality. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that too, because I think that tether to reality, like you're describing, does keep the film in this really balanced place. You know, it's got the elements of surreality, absurdism, but also it's so relatable, you know, and you're able to laugh, but also feel all the different ways of emotions while watching it. So I really appreciate that about
Thanks.
the
That's
film.
that's the goal.
Yeah.
Is I think that I made this movie because I found it really rare for me to watch something and feel like I was watching something that felt authentic to my experience, you know? Mm-hmm. And I don't just mean that, like, you know, I don't just mean that, you know, I've never dealt crack or you know, had a gun or was never a slave, like all of those things, like, yes. But also, you know, I loved The Cosby Show when I was a kid, but The Cosby Show didn't reflect my reality, because nothing bad ever happened on The Cosby Show, you know? The worst thing that happened was Theo wanted an expensive shirt. And so and they had to make a Gordon Gartrell for him, right? Like that was the worst thing that ever happened on this. And so I think that what I wanted out of this movie was the range of human emotion. I didn't want it to be incredibly grim and sad and miserable and tragic. And I didn't want it to be slapsticky and just, you know, very sort of low stakes all the time, because that's not how life is. Life is, you know, a collection of all these different things. And so that's what I wanted. I wanted the movie to take people through a range of emotion instead of just feeling buoyant or miserable the whole time.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what impresses me too, though, is you're performing a type of media criticism through the film in a way that you did as a writer. And so it's kind of incredible knowing your work for a long time, seeing those elements, you know, come forward. And we're at a moment of criticality in popular culture when we're having and able to have, thank God, much more nuanced conversations about what representation means. And I'm kind of hearing you touch on that a little bit. And the way in which it's not just enough to have Black people in the scene in a film. It's not just enough to have a queer love story or, you know, a queer coming out, which is what happens in this film in the best way, you know. On screen, it's like we actually want to know, well, who these people are and what they're doing. We're not just ticking off boxes. And so I'm curious to hear from you on, you know, as a director and as someone who's shaping this vision, what are your priorities and how do you pull all those elements in without it leaning into the same kind of flattening that the book is sort of warning us about?
Yeah, I think that I just wanted to make sure that that all of these human beings felt real and that I wasn't just paying lip service to these things, you know? So there is, as Jenna was saying, there's a Sterling K. Brown plays Jeffrey Wright's little brother in the film, and he is, his name's Cliff, and Cliff's main problem at the moment is that he has just gotten a divorce because his wife came home and found him in bed with a man. And so now he's in his mid to late 40s trying to figure out how to be an openly gay man in America. And I didn't want that to just be like, well, we're throwing that in there to satisfy the queer community and so that they'll get off my back. Right. I wanted to sort of put it in there because A, that's what happens in the book, but B, because it's a story that deserves to be told, and it's sort of like an interesting thing, and it's sort of, and it's, I look at it as sort of like a, I think that the problem is that I think that so many, the reason we see so many, you know, I remember, I don't know if everybody remembers the TV show Girls, but I think the TV show Girls has a lot to offer. In many ways, it's a good show, but when Girls was criticized for not really having any characters of color, I remember the response was like, the creator of the show, Lena Dunham, was like, well, you know, I'm not a person of color myself. I don't sort of like feel comfortable writing those stories, and like, I think that I'm just trying to do it so that I can write the most authentic story possible. And I think that, and that was sort of like the refrain for a lot of people when they get accused of just having totally homogenous casts. And I understand that to a certain extent, but also it's like, when people say that, it's sort of, it's like an incredible, it's like talking about Black people like we're aliens, you know, like how could I even understand your emotional range, like the depth of you people, right? It's like we're just human beings, and we feel the same things that you feel. We're not sort of like very different from you. We certainly have our own issues and struggles that we deal with, but you know, day to day, usually our lives are like yours. So at most, just write this character and then bring in a person of color to help you flesh out sort of like the skeleton that you put together. And I think that for me, I wanted to approach this knowing that like whatever these characters were, they're human beings, right? And you start at that place. You just start like, this is a human being. And I'm not queer, but I have friends who are queer, and so I started writing a human being. I started writing this character as a human being with sort of like a depth of emotion that I have. And then when I had some questions about sort of like what it's like for a queer person in America, I went and asked my friends who are queer and sort of like developed into a real character. And so I think that for me, the starting point for everything good is always character. As long as you sort of like actually come up with complex, interesting characters, the story becomes easy. Because sort of like the actual character beats and figuring out like fully layered human beings are always what I look for when I go to a movie or watch a TV show or go to the theater. I always want sort of a character study. I want character to lead plot and not vice versa. And so for me, the thing that I wanted to fully realize was a black family. It's a black American family, and I wanted to really show the reality of that. And I didn't want it to be too like Cosby Show light, and I didn't want it to be, you know, a black family whose father gets killed by the Klan, and then they have to figure out how to sort of like you know, continue their lives by the loss of their patriarchal figure because of this horrific racist incident. I just think that I just wanted to write a family that felt real to me because I, for so long, felt like I was looking at families that never felt real to me, that didn't feel authentic. I don't know if, a thing that I come back to a lot, and it's really, I don't know if anybody remembers this show, but I used to love this show when I was a kid called Rock with Charles Dutton. You guys remember Rock?
We all know Rock, right?
Rock is like, Rock to me was such an incredible show because it was really rooted in those characters and who those people were as human beings. And they felt real. I loved that show because it was like the first show that I felt like I was watching where it felt real, you know? And like every episode didn't end with a happy ending. Like sometimes it was difficult, you know? Sometimes Rock's brother like went to the track again and spent all his money, right? They would never let Theo go to the racetrack and gamble away all of his money, right? That would never happen. And Rock actually felt real, and it felt grounded in who those characters were and who those people were, and it felt like you were watching real human beings, and that's what I wanted out of the film. I didn't want it to feel like I was paying lip service to any group of people or just throwing in a queer character because you need to throw in a queer character in order to appease activists. I wanted to sort of, if I'm going to make this movie, I want to make sure I make it the right way, and I don't lean on lazy stereotypes or you know, just check the box and move on and don't actually sort of make this character feel like a queer character. It's like, because I know that there's those movies where it's just like, oh yeah, this person's gay, and then they never actually sort of like talk about the fact that they're gay. Right. Yeah, but it's important to me, and I'm happy that people are seeing that in it. Yeah.
I mean, I'll just say from personal experience, you really do capture the queer adolescence that one has, no matter what age you are, when you come into yourself in that way. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it was really, really fun to watch, actually.
Yeah, it
was great.
I love his character. Yeah. I love Cliff.
It also feels like they're having a lot of fun. Like Sterling just seems like he's having a lot of fun playing Cliff. Yeah. And that's also really satisfying to see as well.
Sterling K. Brown's the nicest man in the world, and he's always having fun. It's kind of like frustrating how much he's having fun, because you're like having a hard day, and Sterling K. Brown comes in with the biggest smile on his face. We'd be shooting at midnight, and it'd be miserable and cold outside, and everybody wants to go home, and Sterling would come running on his jog at night. And he's one of those people that smiles and runs in place. He never stops running. He's like, you guys look great. He's just sweating, smiling constantly. Yeah, that's the thing. I think the set was really fun because it was, you know, I think that it was these people don't really get opportunities to do this, you know? It's like, I think that, and that's the thing, that's one of the things that I'm really excited about, and it's one of the reasons why I'm so sad that the actors can't be out here supporting the film and you know, doing press for it because these are not roles that they normally get.
Yeah.
You know, they're always off to the side. Like Tracee Ellis Ross is so wonderful. She's such a great actor. And I feel like people think of Tracee Ellis Ross as doing like sitcoms. She's like a network sitcom person. But she's a wonderful actor with a huge range. And like people should hire her for other stuff. Same with Sterling K. Brown. Same with Jeffrey Wright. You know, yeah, like these are people who are so talented. Keith David is in the film. I won't reveal like what part Keith David is in, but Keith David is in the film, and Keith David is truly like a national treasure. Like that man is a tremendous actor. Like he's Juilliard trained. He's he's played Othello. Like he's done so much Shakespeare. Like he is incredible. And it's so sad to me that these people are always just kind of like also-rans because they're incredible. They're amazing people. And I'm hoping that, you know, one of the things that I really hope that this movie does is shines a spotlight on people who don't otherwise get center stage.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, you know, I was going to mention the idea that in so many ways what this film is also about is what it means to go home again, what it means to find home within yourself. I mean, it's also occurring to me listening to you that it seems like maybe this film has created a kind of, you know, artistic home too for these actors. So there are all these layers and ways in which the film is kind of about returning to yourself and finding your place and finding yourself. One thing I wanted to ask about is in the film, and this is why I think one of the reasons we're showing it here, talking about it here, is the family's home is in the vineyard. And that's where they return to. So the majority of the film takes place here. And in the book, it's different. It's outside of DC in Maryland, Annapolis, which is a word I can't say even though I'm from the DMV. Annapolis, I don't think that's right. But I am curious about that shift and the meaning for you.
Yeah, so I initially said, so the book, as you said, is set in DC. When I wrote the script, I set it in New York, and then the beach house was going to be in Sag Harbor. And it was too expensive to shoot in New York, so we had to move it to Boston. And so it was like, what's another East Coast city that has a literary scene, and there's sort of like an educated pop where he might have his literary agent be there and whatnot. So we decided on Boston. And actually, it never says it. So the beach, I don't know if people know Boston well, but there's a beach town like 45 minutes outside of Boston called Scituate. So we actually shot it in Scituate, but it never says what it is, and it's sort of, you know, it's a reference to Martha's Vineyard. They sort of spend a lot of time at the beach home, this family. And so, you know, it was, you know, we knew that there was a big sort of black community here and sort of like an established black community, and that's the sort of like family that we wanted to represent. And so it's in Scituate, but you guys don't, just pretend it's Martha's Vineyard when you watch the movie.
It basically is, though. Yeah, it is. It is. Okay, so we have one more clip to show.
Yeah.
Can you set it up?
Yeah, this is, so Monk and his girlfriend Coraline, who's played by Erica Alexander, who's wonderful. They've just returned home after a long day, and they return to find Monk's little brother Cliff making a mess of the pool outside. And Monk and Cliff get into a bit of an argument because Monk has been calling Cliff, asking him to come home for weeks because he's taking care of their mother alone, and so he's been asking Cliff to come home, and Cliff finally comes home, and so this is Cliff's return.
I also really love the musical score, the jazz in the background. It's
Thank
such a nice
you.
touch.
Yeah, Laura Cardman. She did an amazing job. I knew that I wanted to have jazz in it from the beginning, and she came in and she studied jazz at Juilliard, and she did an amazing job. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What I enjoy about that clip, too, or the two that we saw back to back, is that they both kind of link the two parallel threads running through the film. One is this existential crisis that Monk is having about his career and just about publishing in general, and also blackness and race in the world. And then also at the same time, you know, this family that's sort of both unraveling and sort of trying to knit itself back together at the same time. And they're happening concurrently throughout the film. And yeah, I just wondered if there was any connection between those things for you, or were you drawing from any personal experience when you were writing through those scenes?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, my mother died of cancer about 7 years ago at this point, and you know, Monk being home and having to take care of his mother very much resembled my life. And like, it was when I was first starting out in entertainment, and I would be working on TV shows in New York City and flying back home to sort of take care of my mother for a little bit, and then flying back to New York City, and then flying back home again. And I think that, so that sort of like juggling of like the personal life with the professional life and all this stuff that goes along with it, again, it just feels real to me. Like I didn't want this to be, when I first started writing the script, I thought, you know, I was like, well, the family stuff's gonna be kind of a slog to write, and then the satire, professional stuff will be really fun to write. And as I started writing, I actually realized that I really like the family stuff just as much as any of the satire stuff. And I think that that's what helps ground the movie. It helps it from becoming like a farcical comedy. You know, it helps it feel like a real story, because you feel like these are real people. And you know, our lives don't get put on pause when we're going through tragedy in our personal life, and our lives, you know, our work always goes, and the things that we have going on in our lives always go. So yeah, I mean, I have two brothers. I have two older siblings. I've started to look like Monk in a scary way. I've started to resemble him a little bit, but also I'm the youngest of three, and so I have a little bit of sort of like Braddy Cliff about me as well. And so there's a bunch of my life wrapped up in there as well that you know, if you know me very well, then you can probably see it. Yeah, but I think that to me is, you know, when people first read the script and saw the movie, they said it feels like, you know, it almost feels like it is two movies combined into one, but in a way that works, you know. And that to me that's fine. Like, I didn't want to make a super syrupy family drama, and I didn't want to make a super comedic, farcical comedy. And so to me, the reason they work well together is because that's how life is. Life isn't just one or the other, it's both, you know.
And I really do appreciate that there are these, there are multiple older Black love stories threaded throughout the film, and that feels like such a concrete choice and such a specific choice, and one that I was really grateful to see, because again, that's not something we ever really get, you know. And there's a version of this film where everyone can be much younger. You could have cast much younger for this film.
Oh, definitely. And I think that was, and I always think that that's, you know, when we were casting Monk's girlfriend, Coraline, you know, people were sending us 27-year-olds, because that's very common in Hollywood to have a 27-year-old woman dating a 57-year-old man, you know? But I said like that I don't want that. I want to have like an age-appropriate love interest. And so, and I had Eric Alexander was like one of the top of my list. And so, and like, Eric Alexander was one of the first names that I put down of somebody that I'd like to meet. And we met Erica, and she's incredible. I've been a fan of hers since Living Single days. Like, she's amazing. Yeah, and then there's another love story that I won't give away, but that you know, those aren't people that you normally see falling in love. You know, those aren't, and despite the fact that that happens every day. Old people fall in love every day, you know? It's fine, it's good, it's reasonable, you know? And and I think that it's, again, it's disappointing to me. I just think that especially nowadays, it feels like we've been told the same story over and over again, and people are so afraid to break out of sort of like the routine. That's why we're seeing every movie get remade, and every TV show get remade, and every book get remade into a movie. I understand this is an adaptation, but this is different. Yeah. This one's different. This isn't a popular book. But I just feel like people aren't bringing new ideas to the table, and I think that, you know, it is amazing to me. You know, it's not like this isn't like Avatar, where I spent 10 years coming up with like new cameras to shoot this footage so that audiences will like have this brand new experience. It's like, you know, it's like a crazy idea of like, what if people like over the age of 60 like fell in love? Is that crazy? And people and people are like, well, it feels incredibly refreshing. And it's like, yeah, just because one person has to say, like, let's make the love interest not 25.
Right.
Let's make the love interest like not super beautiful young people who like all look like models and we're trying to pretend that they're dentists, you know? like that is not the real world, and it's not the kind of movie that I want to make.
I mean, at the heart of what you're talking about too is palatability. Is that a word? I am employed, I promise. You know, but the ways in which, you know, gatekeepers, I mean, this movie specifically is talking about the publishing industry, but the way gatekeepers decide which versions of Blackness, which versions of our lives are palatable, are commodities, are marketable. And, you know, so there's this kind of dual critique that's kind of happening with the way this film is working and the way you're talking about kind of working within it. And I'm just curious to you, you know, making a film about a type of white gatekeeping within an industry that is responsible for a lot of the historical gatekeeping and sort of the paradigm that you're responding to. I mean, I'm curious, sort of, was that hard to navigate for you, or how was that?
Yeah, I think that it was the number of, so we sent this script out. When I was done with the script, we sent the script out to, I had a producer, and we sent it out to, so by then T Street, who produced the film, they were attached, and I believe we had Jeffrey attached, and we sent it out to, you know, distributors all around town. We sent it out to every single one of them, Netflix, Paramount, yada, yada, yada. And I would say we probably sent it to 16, 17 places, and we got a ton of meetings, and the number of times we would end those meetings and somebody would call my reps and say, like, I really wish I worked at a place that would allow me to make this movie.
Wow.
I really wish that this is a company that would allow me to make this movie, but it's just not. And it's like, you work at a company that can make this movie. I know they all have the money.
Right.
They just need a little bit of courage, and they don't have it. That's what goes unsaid. Is like, you just need the courage to say, I think we should put up some money to make this film. And they didn't have the courage. And it's really frustrating to me to hear how many people say that. I heard that from so many people, like, I really wish I worked at a place that we could make this film. And it's like, you do. You just don't want to go to your bosses and say, like, I think we should make this, and put some skin on the line. And I think, and I understand that. I totally understand that. I understand, look, we all have bosses, right? And I understand that you need to cater to your boss's tastes, and that in Hollywood, the bosses generally are straight white men over the age of 50. And that sort of like selling them on a movie like this is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world. But fortunately, I was able to find people who were willing to be courageous, you know, and that was I'm really thankful for that, and I'm incredibly grateful for the companies that came on to make and distribute the film. But I think that we just have such a long way to go. There is such a, as you said, there's such a narrow. Like, another movie that I loved recently was, I guess it's not recent anymore, but Moonlight. I thought Moonlight was incredible because the thing about Moonlight that I thought was so special was that was a movie that had, I don't even know if it had a white character in the entire film. It was a movie that it was just about black people living their lives. That's all it was. And I think that one of the reasons why Hollywood, you know, I think that there's any number, I mean, you can write books about why it's always the same character. I'm reading a book right now, actually, that I highly recommend, by Donald Bogle. It's called Toms, Coons, Mammies, Bucks, and Mulattoes. It's exactly right. It's very good. It's just about the history of blackness and cinema and American cinema. Highly recommended. It's great. But, you know, I think one of the reasons why Hollywood continues telling these same stories over and over, and stories of abuse and stories of slavery and stories of cops killing black kids, is because those stories still center whiteness. It's
Right.
still white people at the center of those stories. It's still white racism that these people are overcoming, right? And so it's still a white police officer. It's still a white slave master. It's still a white racist boss. There's still sort of this world in which it like really centers whiteness. And so I think that a movie like Moonlight is just a real coup. It's difficult to get made, and it's certainly difficult to win Best Picture because it doesn't center whiteness at all. It's just black people. And I think that that's difficult for a lot of people to understand. And it's difficult and I think it's difficult for, I think everybody's just really afraid to touch something like that because it's like, well, how am I supposed to relate to this, you know? Again, and I think it goes back to the thing that like black people are aliens. It's like, well, what can white people get out of watching this movie?
Right.
You know, like how are we going to
Right.
convince white people to come in and watch this movie? And it's like, well, because if it's well made,
Right.
it's going to present to you all of the emotions that white people feel. I promise. I promise we have the same feelings.
Yeah.
You know?
Right,
I
right.
guarantee you.
Well said. I mean, believe it or not, we're kind of at the end of our time here, and this has been such an incredible conversation. But I think one thing I'm curious about before we go is, you know, the shift from erasure to American fiction. What is the American fiction in the film?
We finally came up with a title, like, not an exaggeration, like 60 days ago. Like I've been working on this project for 2.5 years, and we finally decided on a title 2 months ago. Because Erasure was just a non-starter. People thought there was an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie called Eraser. And then when I wrote the script, the title, and it was the title up until 2 months ago that I wanted, it was just fuck. And I promise it will make sense when you see the full film. It's not just me using swear words to use swear words. It has a point. And I really wanted to call it fuck, but then everybody said there's absolutely no way. They won't rate the movie if you call it that, and then theaters won't show it if they don't rate it. So I was really we had like I would say seriously, like we ran through like 50 names of just sort of like pitches for titles, and none worked. And then the true story. I hope people don't judge me. I went home one night and I was like, I'm coming up with a title tonight. I'm doing it. And I smoked a little weed, and I started reading poetry. I went to Langston Hughes. I started reading Langston Hughes. Started reading some James Baldwin. I started just reading poetry, and then I thought, okay, a little bit American, throw that in there, and then it's like about books and it's about an author, and then I just put American fiction together, and then I sent it to, I stupidly didn't wait until I was not stoned. I just sent it. I was like, this is it, American fiction, and luckily I woke up the next morning and everybody agreed. And I think that it is the, it's obviously it's a pun about the publishing industry and fiction books, but I also think that the thing about race and the sort of like is the absurdity of race, right? Is that we all know that it's not real, right? It's a man-made concept. Like there's no scientific basis for race. That said, we have made an entire society based on the premise that race is real. And so we sort of like exist in this liminal space of like it's both real and not real. And it's sort of like a fiction and not a fiction, right? It's sort of both things. And so to me, that's sort of like what the word fiction in the title comes to, is like this idea that, Monk is trying to be who he is. He's just trying to be a human being and live his life. And because of this fiction, because of this sort of like lie that's been told about him and the expectations that people have for him because of the color of his skin, he needs to find a way to sort of succeed and work through those lies. And so I think that to me was, but you know, so yes, there's a heady way to look at it, but also it's not fuck. And that's what I think everybody really liked about it when I said it.
That's perfect. Well, thank you so much, Cord, for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
The film will be out November 3rd. Friday, November 3rd. Friday, November 3rd in New York and LA, and possibly Atlanta. Yes, all right. There we go. And then it'll be sort of like coming to other theaters after that. So hopefully it'll be nationwide by Thanksgiving. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much, and thank you to everyone who put this event on.